Thank you for coming. I hope you can hear me okay with the masking and everything. It's kind of like we're all teaching now like we're robbing a bank, you know? Like Victor mentioned, I took on the role of Associate Dean for Research this last summer and started talking to Victor about ideas for enhancing a little more research at Smith. And one of the ideas that we came up with is a notion that, you know, there's a lot of advantages for you all to engage in research with faculty here. We have wonderful faculty in the school, you know, and to conduct research at Smith as an undergraduate give you a lot of opportunity. I'll talk a little bit about why engage in research, what's in it for you, what are the career opportunity that opens, as well as personal development aspect. And then what I'll do today too is talk a little bit about what it takes to do research in organizational behavior, which is my field. So those of you who already taken 364, you know, that's kind of covering a little bit of the topic that I do research on. I don't know if some of you have taken it already or will take it later, I'm sure. And want to give you a little bit of a sense of the kind, just a little flavor for some of the research methodology and topics that we're addressing it. Tell you a little bit about my story in terms of what got me interested in research, you know, and just at a high level. And then at the end, I want to walk you through a little bit of what's the process from your end. How can you look up faculty across a school, across department from different areas, and how can you engage in research with us, and what are the opportunities as well, okay? Feel free to interrupt at any time. Just raise your hand. I'm happy to make it interactive. If you want, then I'll make sure to ask questions of you as well, okay? So let's get started then. All right. These are the kind of questions that some of you may have asked yourself already, okay? So those are the kind of questions that attracted me to the field of, I'll tell you a little bit about my background in a bit, but it's organizational psychology. So I'm actually, I was a psych major at Penn State as you know, through my undergraduate degree, and I was really interested in questions, some of which tied to those kind of issues. And just reading the current news, looking at what's happening in the world, both in the world of business and the broader world, those are the kind of questions that we hear a lot about. And what I really love about organizational behavior research is that it allows us to really address those questions in more depth and have some interesting answers around that, okay? And every question that you see here, I don't personally do research on every question that you see here, but we do have faculty in the management organization department that engage in those kind of questions. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why research, why conduct research. So, you know, it sounds a little dry when you mention research, particularly if you're not coming into an undergraduate, you know, want to get an undergraduate degree, not thinking research right off the bat. Research sounds like something you should just learn, get your grade on, and move on, some of you. However, if you really think of what science and scientific method means, it's really a way of going about understanding the world, okay? Understanding the world, whether that's biology or physics, understanding the world in terms of computer technology, understanding the world in terms of people, okay? So it's really a tool that allows us to approach questions with critical thinking and uncovering more and more information that inform us, help us understand the world, okay? Now, I put a quote there from Kurt Lewin, who actually is one of the leading social psychologists from the 1930s all the way into the 1950s. He said that nothing more practical than a good theory. And what he means by that is that if you understand how something works, it's a lot easier to act on it in an informed way, okay? And that's really what a lot of us here in the building that conduct research are trying to do. We're trying to understand the world so that then we can better inform all of you in terms of best managerial practices, best organizational practices, as well as best personal practices that is based on understanding. Nothing is really different about management research than what we see all the time in the news now about COVID, okay? If you follow COVID, which I'm sure all of us do, you know that we are able to come up with better health public health policy practices, medical practices, if we understand better. If we don't understand, then we just try this, try that, and nothing really works. Okay, so same is true about research. Now, when I was talking to Victor about why would any of you want to engage in research, we came up with two broad categories here, right? So the first one make better sense for you. Okay, as you know, there's a lot of knowledge-intensive jobs out there, from financial analyst if you're a finance major, consultant, if you're in management major, or a lot of our accountant majors get into consulting, to many other kind of jobs. And actually having research skills, research experience would make you more competitive in those careers. Okay, so that's one benefit that you could gain out of conducting research. The other one, I can tell you that the career that I have as a faculty member, as an academic, is the best career in the world. It really is a wonderful career. It's not easy, and even though it seems like we always spend time not doing any real work, there is a lot going on behind the scene that we're doing. But it's a great job, it's a great career, and some of you may find out that, hey, if I like research, if I like the process, maybe I should go and apply for graduate school. Okay, and that was my track. I'll tell you a little bit about my track in a bit, but that's how I got into graduate school. Is I conducted research as an undergraduate, loved it more and more, and wanted to do more of it in graduate school. And I can tell you that when we're on the other side, when we admit PhD students, all of you, if you engage in research as an undergraduate here, it will make you really competitive for PhD programs, okay? And that's sort of the stepping stone for an academic career, okay? So before I go on, any questions? Before I give you a little more detail about research, questions?
I have one.
Yes.
So I'm trying to put myself in the headspace of freshmen and even students in general, like why. So what intrigued me just now is the word knowledge intensive. Mm-hmm. Because as they are talking and interacting with companies now, you have case methods. Companies are trying to get a little sense of how they think and how they solve problems. So it would seem to me, if you could elaborate a little bit more, because it seemed to me that even if PhD is not in their mindset, the notion of being a little bit more intense in understanding what financial analysis is, I want you to just elaborate on that a little more, because this is where it could hit closer to home. And this is what distinguishes you from just basically learning basic to being a little bit more intentional and proactive about doing something with research.
Yeah, so actually when I was in graduate school, I worked in a consulting firm that applied, so I studied work psychology, and they did a lot of consulting jobs with the government, the police force in Virginia, police force, a lot of other kind of organization. And the consulting, the research skill that I needed in that consulting job were very much research skill, right? So you have a client who come up to you with a problem, okay? Now, if you don't engage in research and critical thinking and you just have off-the-shelf kind of solution, that's one thing. But you'll find out if you get into consulting that a lot of and that's one example of a knowledge-intensive job, is that a lot of what the clients want is they want you to think through options. And they want you to come up with solutions that are custom to them, but based on information that really provide the right solution versus alternative solution. And a lot of the research skills that we're engaging in help you also do those kind of jobs, or financial analyst, or marketing analyst. How are we going to know whether our marketing strategy is a correct one versus 2 or 3 alternative ones? Okay. Well, you conduct some research on that based on what's been done, based on alternative, and those kind of jobs require those kind of skills. Is that?
One more question. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Is it also fair to say that research, like when I was doing research at NYU, my thought process, well, as the professors was explaining to me that, and especially during the dissertation, that they're saying, Victor, what can you do, or what can you study that will contribute something new to the body of knowledge, where, so you're thinking about the future. We're not thinking about here and now. You're thinking, in terms of financial analysis, you're thinking about what's the future, and what can I do to study it so I can inform? Is it the same way in terms of research here too?
It is. So some of the research, I won't talk about that today, but some of the research that I'm conducting with actually your next speaker, Rajvi Agrawal, is going to come and talk to you. She's actually an economist who does research that kind of integrates strategy, entrepreneurship, and also some organizational behavior. And so we were kind of asking questions such as, which kind of organization of the S&P 500 kind of organization, which one of them were able to adapt more to COVID? Okay? And one explanation that we had is that it's not the organization that got rid of overhead, meaning people. That's sort of the first kind of instinct that tend to come is you get rid of overhead. It's actually the organization that had more committed employees and were able to actually code organization in terms of how committed their employees are to the organization. And we're able to tie it, for example, to market share in the stock market. Okay, so it's kind of showing the value of engaging your employees. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that you can go with that data, and I actually presented it to our executive MBAs, and you go to them and you basically say, look, your first instinct is to cut, when there's big crisis like COVID, is to cut costs. And most organizations, the easiest way to cut costs oftentimes is to lay off and or put employee on pay without leave and so forth. But that's also the kind of solution that would basically get you to lose the opportunity to innovate and adapt. Okay, so that would be one example where you think X, but Y is the correct one, and research skills would enable you to get there. Okay, whether you're a researcher or a consultant or other kind of jobs. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about kind of research and question that I've been asking. Okay, so and I'll tell you in the next slide why I'm really interested in it, but I'm really interested in the interplay between individual and teams, okay? So just like those funny comics indicate, there's a lot of dynamic in teams that make people either hate working in teams, because they sometimes feel like, hey, I have to sacrifice my own career success for the team outcome. I don't like that, okay? But there's also a lot of team pressure that happen and team dynamics that happen in teams, where you may be asked to do things that you wish now do, like poor Dave here, that is sort of the sacrificial penguin for the group here, okay? There's also a lot of things that got me interested in terms of how do individuals impact a team? So when you work in a team, how do you become a leader in terms of making the team move to the direction you want, and how do you convince others? There's a lot of interesting dynamic that happen in team that got me interested in those kind of questions, okay? Now, before I give you a couple examples, so I'm not, despite my last name, I wasn't born and raised in China. I'm actually Israeli. Last name is pronounced Chen. And I grew up in a small place called kibbutz. I don't know if you heard of that. It's kind of like a socialistic, communistic kind of agricultural type of way of life in Israel, particularly in the 20th century, where growing up, I kept hearing about the collective good is more important than the individual good. That's kind of the place I was born and raised. However, I was a competitive swimmer. Okay, so within that system, I was a competitive swimmer, which is the most individualistic sport you could have. And so I lived it. Growing up, I lived that tension between the collective good and the individual kind of motivation and achievement. Okay, so that was always in the background. Then, because of my swimming, I was able to get scholarship and was able to go to Penn State and swim for Penn State. And that, again, when I swam in Israel, and I swam at a pretty high level, and I was always, it was always me in the water. And some people were around, but it was me in the water. Whereas in Penn State, all of a sudden they told me, oh, you're part of a team, okay? We have to do everything as a team. And I hated it. I absolutely hated that, okay? So again, that tension between individual success and team success was always in the background, and that got me really interested as an undergraduate to really learn about how do we balance that dynamic, okay? So went on, I conducted some research based on a leadership class that I've taken in undergraduate at Penn State, did some research, kind of liked the busy work behind it, okay? So I can tell you, you're not going to start your research career by just publishing and get the glory. There's a lot of work behind the scene that's happening, a lot of busy work, but also exciting work. And I'll give you some example in a second. And then I got a PhD in organizational psychology down the street here in George Mason. and then went on to an academic career. Okay? Now, if you have questions about career-wise, I'm happy to also answer. But before we do that, let me give you a couple of projects that I'm currently working on, just to give you a little bit of a flavor for the kind of research we do in organizational behavior. Okay? And again, you may hate organizational behavior, and you may want to do research that is more economics-based or sociological-based or computer science-based. We have people in the building who do research on all type. Okay, so first there's two research projects I'll just share very, very briefly with you. The first research project, and it kind of shows to also show you a little bit of how you get ideas, okay? So I've been teaching this case in my classes here in Maryland for the last, 10, 12 years, dealing with this Columbia shuttle disaster. I don't know how many of you remember that disaster. It was basically when the Columbia shuttle took off from Cape Canaveral, there was the foam that kind of cools the engine so it doesn't burn. The foam basically punched a hole in the left wing of the shuttle. Okay, and during that time, during that mission, there were a group of engineers led by Rodney Rocha that you see here. Okay, and he and a group of engineers expressed serious concerns to NASA. They were speaking up. They're basically, as part of the mission management team, which was led by Linda Ham here on the right, they were really interested. They were really saying, listen, we got to slow down and check this out. We're worried about disastrous outcome upon re-entry to Earth. Okay? And unfortunately, and this is, by the way, a direct quote from the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, unfortunately, their voice, their way of speaking up was not addressed. Now, the case is complicated. There's a lot of reasons why. But it got me thinking, why is it that when people speak up and do the right thing in teams, why is it that they're not making a difference, that it actually doesn't impact the team? And when is it more likely to impact the team? So together with a colleague of mine, Surba Tangirala, who's currently a department chair in Maryland, we conducted a couple of studies to kind of get at that kind of question. Okay? So here we are teaching this case, thinking about that from multiple directions, and realizing, to your point earlier, Victor, there's no real answers. Why weren't Rodney Rocha and his engineering colleagues, why weren't they hurt? So this is just one of the few studies that we conducted, but we basically ask you to read a scenario, okay, where you're basically a part of a marketing team. Okay, it was just a marketing team kind of thing. And your team includes Alex and Chris. Alex holds a more central role in the team. Okay? In other words, there's more information flow through Alex. Okay? And Alex also ties more of a boundary spanner between the team and the CEO and customers. And then Chris is the least central member. What we basically want to see is whether one explanation for why Rodney Rocha wasn't listened to is the fact that he didn't have enough information flow through him in NASA so that his voice wasn't deemed to be useful and therefore wasn't acted on. That's kind of the hypothesis that we had. Okay? And this is an example of a voice. Basically, imagine that either Alex, who's higher than you in terms of role or more central to the team, or Chris, who's less central, spoke up with this suggestion here. We want to see which one of these two would make you feel like their voice, even though the voice is the same, would you perceive it more or less useful depending on whether you come from central or non-central member. Okay? And we basically found that when the voice emanated, when it came from most central members, it was perceived by team members to be more useful. And therefore, they acted on it, they coordinated their effort better, and then team performed better. We did the same thing also in a live simulation of a team that we used to have here in Maryland, finding the same thing where we code voice coming from more central members. Despite of how actually useful it is, people believe it's more useful and therefore they act on it. Okay? So one lesson here is that if Rodney Rocha had a more central role within NASA, it's much more likely that they would have acted on his concern. Okay? Questions before I move to the second one? Okay. So this is sort of an example of a very basic experimental setting where we can manipulate attribute that we feel would make a difference in terms of, in this case, an employee behavior that would impact the team. All right, let's move to sports. How many of you follow European soccer, European football? Only you? All right. Well, it's a big deal. European football. It's football, by the way. Only we American call it soccer. It's football. It's a really big deal, and they don't actually have they don't have cap on how much you could pay employees, okay, or players, unlike the NBA and the NFL and MLB. So recently, this is a story from the summer where Messi, who spent most of his career, this Argentinian star, spent most of his career in Barcelona, moved to Paris Saint-Germain, okay? And this kind of just illustrates the context that we're after here. We basically want to see, oh, and by the way, the amount of money that Paris is paying for him is just enormous. You know, it's like basically what we pay CEOs here in the country, okay? And we want to see whether paying more for human talent, for more expensive talent, translate to better performance in the team of the new player, okay? But we also want to see whether there's some attributes. So we obviously expected that if you pay more money for a more talented player, more talented employee, that employee would perform better when they join a new team, okay? But we also want to see a few other questions that are less obvious, okay? So are you joining a high-performing team or a low-performing team? So for example, both Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain are very good teams. So their prior performance in the league is very strong. But what if you join a lesser team, can't think of one at this point, but think of Cologne, for example, in Germany, that it may not be in the top at the league, in the Bundesliga, but they may be in lower league. How does that affect your performance as a newcomer? And then, are you joining a team with multiple players same time, or just you and one other? Okay. So before I go to when you join, I want to ask you, what do you think in terms of joining a better performing team? Do you think you'll help your performance as an individual, or would hurt you? What do you think?
A little bit of both. It can hurt your performance due to the fact that you might not be like the absolute top performer on the team anymore, but it could help you if you take the role as a contributor rather than the main person. It can help the team as a whole. It depends on how the newcomer is handling the situation.
Yes, it's a little bit of a frog pond kind of question, right? So if you're a medium frog joining a really big pond, a really good team, then the chances for you to stand out and perform well personally may be lower, right? On the other hand, when you join a good team, when you join a really high-performing team, there are processes and systems in place that facilitate anybody's performance. That's why they perform well. Everybody in the team does better, right? So that's one. Any other thoughts on prior performance of the team? Can you think of any other elements that would affect your performance as a newcomer? Yes, absolutely. And that, by the way, is also true to a number of newcomers, right? So when you join an existing team, and that, by the way, a lot of you are going to face that when you go on internship, when you go on your own new jobs. When you join a well-functioning system, how likely is that well-functioning system adapt to you? And part of the way it would adapt to you is, if you join and the three of them are already really good friends, are they going to embrace you as another friend, or are they going to say, you do your stuff, we got it covered, right? And it turns out that the literature, previous research suggests both in terms of joining a well-performing team, give you a lot of opportunities to function well because the systems are well, but it also affects how likely you are to stand out, as individually. And in terms of number of newcomers, when you join with more newcomers, it can help you in terms of actually friends from the other side. So if you're all newcomers, if you're all freshmen, you have a connection, you have a bond, right? You help each other, okay? That would facilitate your performance. But it also means that there's more of a shock to the team because they have to adapt to they have to change more of their routines okay, at the same time. So that's why we put question marks there. And then the nice thing about European professional European football leagues, and we looked at the top 5, like Premier League in England, Bundesliga in Germany, and so forth. The nice part is that you have 2 times that you could join the team. One is in the beginning of a season, and that's actually, think of it as joining a new organization where you have time to adapt to each other, you have more opportunity to learn new routines because, it's preseason, you have more time. Or you could join mid-season where you literally have a few days to adapt, okay? So I may join sometime in January to Liverpool, let's say, on Wednesday, and I would already play Saturday. So there's very little time to adapt, okay? So we kind of looked at those functions, at those kind of questions to really understand the bigger question here, is it worthwhile for an organization or a team to hire more expensive talent? And what are the conditions that also play a role in terms of whether they would cash their investment in terms of better individual performance, okay? And here's, and the way we studied that is, I had a couple of graduate students actually who were in a German institution in a technical university in Munich, and they were pretty high-level football player themselves, and they got access to these big data sets, big websites that have information about market value in the beginning of the season. They track every game, like you get an actual score for your performance, okay? And then all these other information. So this is kind of like looking at existing data on the website and apply computer science kind of methods to basically scrape the data and then answer those questions, okay? So very different methods to answer, again, different questions about individual and team dynamics. So here's what we found. A newcomer joined preseason. Not surprisingly, investing in higher market value translates to better newcomer performance. And it was more in terms of a positive influence of prior. When you join a higher performing team, it helps you individually. In part because when you join preseason, you have more time to adjust to each other, okay? No relationship between the number of newcomers and newcomer performance, okay? Now, when you join the team mid-season, here's what we found. Again, positive effect for newcomer human capital, but joining a higher performing team mid-season, they don't want to adjust to you. You adjust to them. And as a result, your own individual performance was actually harmed, okay?
It's actually what?
Was actually lower. So in other words, the higher the mid-season performance of the team that you joined, the worse your own performance was, okay? And number of newcomers, if you had like 5 or 8 newcomers versus, let's say, 1 or 2, the team, individual performance suffered more. Because you and the newcomer group had to adjust. There's more adjustment between the team and the newcomers that hurt your individual performance, okay? And then this was actually a little more in line with your comment earlier, I think. It's kind of hard to see, but the steeper line, the steeper positive slope is between newcomer human capital and lower performing teams. Regardless of whether you join mid-season or preseason, investing in higher human capital was especially beneficial for lower performing team than higher performing team. Okay? Higher performing team it's not like they didn't benefit from investing in better players, but they didn't need it as much as lower performing team. Okay? Question, thoughts about this research?
So I was just wondering, like, professional golf is like there's a lot of money in it. Has research like this never been done before? And it's like more general of a question, like for research. Is there like a lot of duplicated research on like the same topic?
Is there a lot of? Duplicate.
On the same topic.
So interestingly, there's not a lot. There's some research on investment in players in professional sports. Not a lot, not as much as you'd think. Okay, so that's again where
that's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity, right? I mean the two graduate students that I'm working with on this, I mean, they actually want to get the PhD and go and consult organization, including football, professional football team, because there's not a lot of knowledge on that. And there's a very, very large literature on newcomer socialization, onboarding of newcomer across organization. One of the limitations of that research is that we looked at elements of human capital, like your experience, your personality, maybe some knowledge tests, things like that you do in selection. But this is a much broader way of thinking of human capital. This would be analogous to hiring a more expensive faculty member to the school. This would be analogous to, you know this marketing star, and you're willing to pay premium for the marketing star, or for that matter, a new CEO, you know.
Or could it be even getting closer to home, a student who starts off with a salary of 125 versus the student who got 60?
Exactly. And there's not a lot of research on that, in part because there's very little integration. So there is a lot of research in human capital in those terms, in more economics-based research, where everything is aggregated to like the firm level and looked at it that way. But this is at the team level. This is more micro, looking at individual benefits. And that's something that we also see more and more, is that integration between economics-based, sociological-based research and psychological-based research. So in other words, this is a unique data set that enabled us to address missing questions. Okay? But that's the fun thing about research, is that oftentimes you think you think we already have a lot of knowledge about certain topic, and turns out that we don't. And that's how you make that's kind of how the world of research operate. You learn incrementally over time. Okay? Other questions or other thoughts about this? All right, so this is a way for us to basically address these kind of questions. There's a lot of other studies that we conduct in different methods. Sometimes we use online experiments based on, like the first example. Other time we have like behavioral labs here that you may do some research on. And then other time we go to organization. I've done a lot of research where I would go to an organization, study that. My dissertation was actually on newcomers in teams, in project teams, like IT kind of project teams, and actually surveyed indication of performance. But research like that, it's very hard to go to an organization and tell them, tell me how much you just paid. What's the salary level of you versus you versus you? Like, organization will be very reluctant to share that data. And that's a nice thing about professional football, is that data is publicly available, so you can look at it. Okay? So there's a lot of different ways of conducting this. Okay? So this is what I have in terms of just sharing with you a little bit of the kind of research that we do in organizational behavior. What I want to do before I go and kind of show you a little bit about ways for you to engage in research, it's a much broader field than I can tell you in like a short half an hour period. But do you have any questions about doing research, other questions, other kind of research that's done in the management department? Any questions you may have on that?
Can you generally go about like contacting someone for research opportunities?
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm heading with this. So what I wanted to do is, so we have different kind of faculty with different emphasis in the school. And you may have noticed that there's different title for different faculty. So we have, broadly, we have 3 types of faculty you may take classes from. Okay? We have adjunct professors, people who come and this is like a part-time job for them, and they come and they teach. We have professional track faculty. Most of them come from a research background, but they're really strong teachers, and they're doing some service, and they don't really do as much of the research. And then we have what we call tenured faculty, okay, where a big part of the portfolio is research. And it's a little confusing when you think about it in terms of looking it up. So the first thing I would do to find out what kind of research is being done and by who is go to the website, the Smith West School website, choose an academic department. Okay, you see we have 6 departments with very diverse set of research, and literally search, think of yourself, what kind of topic seems to interest me and what kind of research people are doing. So if I went, for example, to the management organization department, okay, under faculty, okay, there's a list of all of us here. Okay, so this is Raji. You're going to hear about her over dinner and next month. Okay, so you can see the kind of title that they have. If it says assistant professor, associate professor, or full professor, or chaired professor, you know that they're doing some research. Okay, so for example, Sergey. Okay, you click on him. He's an economist, and you could see the kind of research that he does. He actually has a research statement that tells you about the kind of research that he does. Okay, you can look a little bit at his publication and click on them, maybe get a sense of what kind of work he does. Okay, and that way you can see, is it interesting to you, is it not? If it's interesting to you, you could email him, ask, can I get engaged with your research? Can I meet and talk to you about that? Okay, let me also show you that, for example, Nicole is a wonderful faculty. She's associate dean of our full-time MBA program, but she doesn't do as much research. She's a clinical professor. Okay, clinical professors means that you teach more, you do service, but you don't do as much research. Same with Pratiti. Okay, so you may take classes from them, but you may not necessarily have as easy time doing research with them and so forth. Okay, Rarely, for example, does a lot of research on ethics and interpersonal dynamic. Okay, so you could look at her research and again, learn what kind of research that is done, see if the topic catches your eye, and then you can approach them. Okay, so that's my suggestion is look at the websites, okay, and see whether the research that's been done is of interest to you. Okay, other questions? You can ask me anything about career-related questions, what it's like getting engaged in research, other topics, other faculty that have interest. Any other questions?
So I know that a lot of research is sometimes redone to see if it's still relevant in our time or in the future. When do researchers usually decide, like, let's retry this research?
So almost like your question, right? Like, do you also do research to verify prior findings and so forth? Okay, that's part of your question. But other part is we know, for example, of a certain kind of leadership style that worked really, really well, but is it still valid? So we do that all the time. The way a lot of the research is being done, we understand what we know. We start with, here's what we know about, let's say, how leaders can retain employees better. Okay, here's what we know. But then whenever we look at a body of knowledge, there's always things we don't know. Okay, so the question we ask more often, then it's not whether it works or doesn't work. What else can we know that helps beyond that? Okay. So some of the question is, do we really know what leaders do to retain employees? And another question is, how can we know more? Because there's always knowing more. That's one. The other aspect, that's another aspect I really like about organizational behavior. The world of work changes all the time. Okay, the workforce changes. What it means to work like. We didn't used to have research on, we have a lot of research now on work-family conflict and work-family interface. That wasn't a very popular, we had very little, if any, research on that up until the 1970s. In part because there weren't a lot of dual career earner families. So those kind of questions weren't asked. Now we really care about that. Or virtual teams, okay? Now, particularly now with the pandemic, there's a lot of virtual team, a lot of individuals working from all over the world with different technologies. So we know a lot about teams, We know a lot about telecommuting, but now it's kind of like a different way in which it works. So that's the kind of question that we would ask. Does that make sense? Okay. And that's the beauty of it, is that you have to keep track of the world of work, what's happening in an organization. Also, in our case, a lot of us keep up with what's happening in the field of psychology and related fields, and then we try to integrate them. Okay? Other question? Yeah.
How much of a commitment time-wise is it to assist as a company?
That's a good question. So the idea that Victor and I try to kind of implement now is, and he's going to announce it more formally when we have more of a parameter, is we want to actually give you an opportunity to earn like an actual title on your resume, something like Smith Undergraduate Research Scholar or something like that. How much of it? It's negotiable, you know. So I'd say typical, like when I was an undergrad and most undergrads I've worked with, it would be anywhere between 4 or 5 hours a week to 10 hours maybe. But for how long and how much varies. So it's a little bit negotiable between you and professors you approach. Okay. It's also what you want out of it. So if you're really into it and you want to do it for a couple of years, you could also you can do an honor thesis. Okay, you could even get on a paper that get published if you really contribute to it, or you could just do it for one semester, get the experience, and move on. It's really up to you. Okay, and it's very hard to quantify hours too. In some research, in some tasks, you could do it. If you have to code data, so here's a bunch of transcript and you have to code it in a certain way, or if you have to scrape certain data from certain places, you can kind of count hours. Other times it's kind of hard to do. So it depends what kind of research you're doing. Okay? But it's flexible. Okay? Other questions?
In college, did you have internships based on research, or what would research look like in the workforce?
It's a good question. So I was a psych major, so I did it for credit. And I believe there's opportunity also to earn some credit, and that's where the hours come a little more important. If you want to do it for another, independent study or something like that, you could. I'm sure we found a way to do it. In terms of internships, so there are internships out there that would give you research experience, right? It's more likely to be like doing market research, or find out, doing a literature review of what's been done, kind of task. But again, it depends where you may have opportunity to do research as part of an internship. But I can tell you that also a lot of organizations that hire for internship, for jobs, are looking for those experiences. Okay, so it would make you stand out on your resume. Okay. Other questions? Anything else? All right, so you'll have 3 other opportunities to hear from faculty from very different topics, very different approaches. Victor sent you information on that. Keep in mind that there are a lot of different ways of doing research in business, from accounting to finance to strategy, entrepreneurship, and so forth. And so there's a lot of different topics. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sample from organizational behavior. But even in our department, in M&O, we have people who do this kind of research. We have folks who do research on ethics, research on entrepreneurship, research on non-compete agreement. Evan Starr is doing work on non-compete. Like what are the implications of trying to lock employees so they don't leave? Or if they leave, they're not allowed to share certain information. All kind of research that's been done. And I hope you find that interesting. And then if you have questions, feel free to contact me or Victor at any time. If you want to engage in research, the best thing to do is to look through the website, look for topics that seem interesting to you, and reach out to faculty. Worst come to worst, the faculty would tell you, I don't really do research in that topic at this point, but you may want to talk to 2 of my colleagues who do. Okay, And what we're trying to do is we try to match, at least if some of you have interest, we try to match you to faculty that are of interest to you in terms of doing research with them. And then, then you'll be able to get some experience. I would also say that you don't necessarily have to work alone. And so some faculty, like I can tell you, if you contacted me and you have two of you who are interested in research on team and leadership, those kind of topics, I'll be happy to have you work together too. Or in other cases, I believe Rajri, which come presenting, she may have you work with some of her graduate students. And in fact, that's what I did when I was doing undergraduate research. I worked with graduate students on research at the faculty, and I got to join research meetings and learn a lot about the topic, and it was a great learning opportunity. So there's a lot of different models here, and I hope that it kind of opens your eyes to another opportunity that the Smith School offers you, and I hope you find it interesting. Any other questions? All right, so I've stood enough between you and your lunch, so I hope you enjoy lunch. Thank you for your time, and good luck. Thank you.